The massive Valian warship drifted silently through the darkness of space, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian against the stars. Inside the command center, dozens of alien officers worked at their stations, their elongated fingers dancing. Across holographic displays that pulsed with otherworldly light, Commander Thexful stood before the main viewing screen, his four eyes studying the small blue and green planet that hung before them like a jewel in the void. His species had conquered 17 star systems, each one adding to the ever-growing Valian Empire. This was just another routine expansion mission, another primitive world to catalog and claim. "Sensor report," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. Lieutenant Mordox consulted his instruments. "The planet shows signs of widespread industrial activity, Commander. Multiple population centers, primitive transportation networks, and what appears to be ongoing military conflicts across several continents." Dexvel's mandibles clicked in. What passed for amusement among his kind? Military conflicts? "Show me." The main screen flickered, displaying images captured by their long-range sensors. Explosions bloomed across battlefields where tiny figures scurried like insects. Crude metal vehicles rolled across scarred landscapes, spitting fire and smoke. Aircraft that seemed impossibly primitive by Valian standards engaged in aerial combat, trailing black smoke as they fell from the sky. "Look at them," Thexful said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They fight with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Their most advanced weapons are barely beyond throwing rocks at each other." The bridge crew shared what might have been laughter, though the sound was more like the scraping of metal against stone. They had seen this before on dozens of worlds. Species that had barely crawled out of their planetary cradles, still fighting over resources and territory like wild animals. "Classification recommendation?" asked the ship's science officer. "Subsentient savages," Thexful replied without hesitation. "They show some tool use and basic coordination, but nothing approaching true intelligence. They might be useful as laborers once we break them of their violent tendencies." Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Dr. Kim Minho sat in his small office at Seoul National University, completely unaware that his world was being judged by beings from beyond the stars. Ancient texts covered his desk, their pages yellowed with age. He had spent years studying the patterns hidden in humanity's oldest languages, searching for connections that others had missed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he traced his finger along a particularly interesting symbol. There was something familiar about it, something that reminded him of mathematical sequences he had seen in other cultures. It was as if all of humanity's earliest writings were trying to say the same thing, just in different ways. A student knocked on his door. "Professor Kim, have you seen the news?" Minho looked up, blinking away hours of concentration. "What news?" "There are ships in the sky? Huge ones. They're not from here." Minho's blood ran cold. He rushed to the window and looked up at the afternoon sky. There, hanging motionless above the city like dark clouds, were three massive objects that defied explanation. They were too large, too perfectly geometric, too obviously artificial to be anything from Earth. Within hours, every major city on the planet would see the same sight. Within days, everything would change forever. The morning sky above Seoul turned dark as shadows fell across the city. What people first mistook for storm clouds revealed themselves as something far more terrifying. Massive ships, each the size of a city block, descended through the atmosphere with mechanical precision. Their hulls gleamed like polished metal, and strange lights pulsed along their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Minho was still in his office when the first sonic boom shattered windows across the university campus. Students screamed and ran in all directions as the ground shook beneath their feet, grabbed his research papers and rushed outside, only to freeze in absolute terror at what he saw. The ships hung just above the tallest buildings, their undersides bristling with weapons that looked like nothing humanity had ever conceived. Beams of purple energy lanced down, striking military installations with surgical precision. Fighter jets scrambled from nearby air bases, their pilots brave enough to face the impossible. It was over in minutes. The human aircraft simply disintegrated. When they came too close to the alien vessels, not destroyed by weapons, but dissolved, as if they had never existed at all. The pilots didn't even have time to scream. Professor Kim, Park Gina, his research assistant, ran toward him across the campus courtyard. Her face was pale with terror, but she still clutched her laptop containing years of their linguistic research. What's happening? Before Minho could answer, a strange humming filled the air. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through their bones and making their teeth ache. Then the light came. Blue energy fields erupted from the ships like massive nets, sweeping across the city in waves. Anyone caught in the light simply vanished, their bodies dissolving into streams of particles that flowed upward into the waiting vessels. Minho watched in horror as his colleagues, his students, innocent people walking the streets, all disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Gina's hand. But there was nowhere to go. The energy fields were everywhere, sweeping methodically through every building, every street, every hiding place. The aliens weren't just attacking randomly, they were harvesting. The blue light touched Minho's skin, and everything changed. His vision blurred, his body felt like it was coming apart at the molecular level. And then darkness claimed him completely. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on a cold metal floor, surrounded by hundreds of other humans. They were all unconscious, arranged in neat rows like merchandise in a warehouse. The air smelled of ozone and something else he couldn't identify. Through transparent walls, he could see the curve of space beyond, stars wheeling slowly as their prison ship traveled through the void. Fleet Admiral Kurthax reviewed the harvest reports with satisfaction. Over 50,000 specimens collected from the third planet, all healthy and suitable for various labor assignments, had proceeded exactly as planned. Separate them by physical capabilities, he ordered his subordinates. Males with stronger builds for construction work in the outer colonies, females for domestic duties and service positions. They appear trainable enough for basic tasks. The other officers nodded, already planning distribution routes to various worlds throughout the Valian Empire. To them, the humans were simply resources to be allocated where needed most. Earth grew smaller behind them, its surface scarred by the brief but devastating encounter. The blue planet would recover eventually, but its people were gone, scattered across the galaxy like seeds in a cosmic wind. The transport ship's cargo bay opened with a hiss of pressurized air, and Minho stumbled out onto an alien world that defied every expectation. Valios Prime stretched before him like a fever dream made real. Towering spires of crystalline material reached toward a purple sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float without any visible support. The air itself shimmered with an energy that made his skin tingle. Valian guards. Their movements sharp and mechanical, herded the human captives into different groups. Minho watched helplessly as families were separated, friends torn apart. The aliens didn't seem to care about the tears or desperate pleas. Not to them. Humans were just cargo to be sorted and distributed. "You," a guard pointed at Minho with a device that looked like a metal claw. "Archive duty. Follow the blue markers." Minho had no choice but to obey. The blue holographic markers led him through winding corridors filled with technology he couldn't begin to understand. Walls pulsed with living light, and the floor beneath his feet felt warm and slightly soft, as if it were made of some organic material. The great archive of Valios Prime was beyond massive. It stretched as far as he could see in every direction, filled with countless shelves reaching up into darkness. Ancient scrolls, crystalline data storage devices, and books made from materials he couldn't identify filled every available space. The air smelled of age and knowledge, tinged with the metallic scent of alien technology. "Your task is simple," the archive keeper, a tall Valian with 6 arms, explained in broken human speech. "Ancient documents too delicate for machines. You organize, you catalog, you touch gently. Break anything, you suffer." Minho nodded, keeping his expression blank.
Oh.
The Valians had no idea they had just given a linguistics professor access to their most precious historical records. They saw him as nothing more than a trained animal, useful for his careful hands and ability to follow instructions. Days turned into weeks as Minho worked among the ancient texts. He learned to recognize Valian writing, to understand their numbering systems, to decode their organizational methods. Every day brought new discoveries, new insights into this alien civilization that had enslaved his people. Meanwhile, across the city, Park Gina was learning her own lessons in survival. She had been assigned to clean the residence of a high-ranking Valian official, scrubbing floors and preparing meals with ingredients that looked nothing like earthly food. The work was exhausting, but it gave her access to something valuable: conversations. The Valians talked freely around their human servants, never imagining that the primitive beasts might be listening and learning. Gina memorized every word. Every phrase, every grammatical structure she heard, her mind, trained by years of linguistic study, absorbed the alien language like a sponge. The breakthrough came when Minho discovered a section of the archive filled with translation guides. Ancient Valian texts paired with scripts from dozens of conquered worlds. It was a linguistic treasure trove, and he began copying symbols onto scraps of discarded packing material, hiding them in the seams of his rough servant's clothing. Getting messages to Gina required creativity and patience. Other human servants moved throughout the city, delivering supplies, performing maintenance, carrying out countless small tasks that kept the alien civilization running. They became an invisible network, passing tiny pieces of folded paper from hand to hand, building a secret communication system right under their captors' noses. The Valians never suspected that their primitive slaves were quietly documenting their language, their culture, their weaknesses. They saw only obedient servants going about their daily tasks, never imagining that humanity's greatest weapon had always been their ability to learn, adapt, and survive. The ancient scroll crumbled slightly as Minho carefully unrolled it on the examination table. After 3 months in the Great Archive, he had developed a gentle touch that impressed even the Valian overseers. They had begun trusting him with increasingly valuable documents, never suspecting that their primitive servant was making the discovery of a lifetime. This particular scroll was different from the others. It glowed faintly with an inner light, and the symbols seemed to shift and dance when he wasn't looking directly at them. The material felt warm beneath his fingers, almost alive. According to the catalog number, it was over 10,000 years old, yet it looked as fresh as if it had been written yesterday. Eternal voices, Minho whispered, reading the title and the flowing Valian script he had learned to decipher. His heart began to race as he realized what he was looking at wasn't just another historical document. This was a religious text. One of the most sacred writings in Valian culture. The archive keeper had mentioned the eternal voices in passing, speaking of them with a reverence that bordered on fear. According to Valian mythology, these beings were the creators of all life in the galaxy. They had shaped worlds, breathed consciousness into countless species, and established the fundamental laws that governed reality itself. Minho's hands trembled as he began to translate the opening passage. The text spoke of beings of pure thought and energy, entities that existed beyond physical form. They had walked among the stars when the universe was young, spreading life and knowledge wherever they went. But then, for reasons the scroll didn't explain, they had simply vanished. Eternal voices spoke reality into existence, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Their words became the foundation of all that is. Their songs shaped the dance of planets. Their silence left the cosmos yearning for their return. As he continued reading, something impossible began to happen. The symbols on the page started to look familiar. Not familiar in the way that comes from weeks of study, but familiar in a deeper sense. As if he had seen them before in dreams or half-remembered visions. His breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. These weren't just random patterns. They were mathematical sequences, geometric progressions, harmonic ratios that he had encountered in his research on ancient human languages. The Fibonacci sequence was there, hidden in the curve of one symbol. The golden ratio appeared in the proportions of another. Prime number sequences were encoded in the spacing between words. Minho pulled out a hidden piece of paper where he had been documenting his discoveries. With shaking hands, he began sketching the symbols from the scroll, comparing them to notes he had made about ancient human scripts. The similarities were undeniable. Proto-Sanskrit, early Mesopotamian cuneiform, even the mysterious symbols found in European cave paintings. They all shared structural elements with these eternal voice writings. "This can't be possible," he muttered, but the evidence was right there in front of him. The beings that the Valians worshipped as gods. The mysterious eternal voices who had supposedly created all life in the galaxy had used a writing system that was somehow connected to humanity's oldest languages. The implications were staggering. If the eternal voices were real, and if their writing system had influenced human languages, then humanity's connection to the cosmos was far deeper than anyone had ever imagined. They weren't just another species that had evolved on a random planet. They were somehow linked to the very beings that the Valians considered divine. Minho carefully rolled up the scroll and returned it to its protective case. His mind was racing with possibilities, questions, and a growing suspicion that humanity's enslavement might not be as random as it seemed. The eternal voices had left behind more than just symbols and stories. They had left behind a legacy that ran through human blood and human consciousness. The question was, what did it mean? And how could he use this knowledge to save his people? The dim light of Valios Prime's artificial moon cast long shadows across Minho's hidden workspace. He had discovered this abandoned storage room weeks ago, tucked away in the deepest levels of the Great Archive. Here, surrounded by dust-covered relics and forgotten equipment, he could work without fear of discovery. Spread across the floor were dozens of paper scraps, each one covered with symbols, diagrams, and notes written in tiny handwriting. To any Valian guard who might stumble upon them, they would look like meaningless scribbles. But to Minho, they represented months of careful research and an earth-shattering discovery. He had mapped over 300 eternal voice symbols, comparing each one to patterns from human languages, mathematics, and even music theory. The connections were everywhere, once you knew how to look. The symbol for creation matched the mathematical constant that governs spiral galaxies. The glyph for harmony perfectly aligned with the frequency ratios found in every human musical scale. "It's like they left us a code," he whispered to himself, tracing a particularly complex symbol with his finger. A message hidden in our own languages. But the most incredible discovery was yet to come. As he worked deeper into the translations, he began to notice that the eternal voice texts weren't just describing abstract concepts. They were instruction manuals. Guides for manipulating energy, for understanding the fundamental forces of the universe, for awakening dormant capabilities that lay sleeping in the minds of their descendants. A soft knock on the storage room door made him freeze. 3 quick taps, followed by 2 longer ones. The signal he and Gina had agreed upon. "It's me," came her whispered voice through the metal door. Minho quickly gathered his papers and let her in. Gina looked exhausted, her servant's uniform stained. With the alien cleaning compound she was forced to use daily, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "I have news," she said, settling down beside him on the cold floor. "Strange news from the other humans?" She pulled out a small piece of fabric with writing so tiny it was barely visible. The servant network had developed increasingly sophisticated ways of passing information, using everything from patterns in folded laundry to sequences of dropped objects.
"Ollie, Sue."
"Sue sent word from the mining colony on Zarian 7, she began.
"Ollie."
But when he touched the machines, they started working again. Not just working, they were running better than when they were new. Minho leaned forward, his heart racing.
"What exactly did he do?"
"He says he just put his hands on the control panels and somehow knew what was wrong. The knowledge just appeared. In his mind, like remembering something he had forgotten. The Valian overseers think it's some kind of primitive intuition, but Sue says it felt like the machines were talking to him." She unfolded another hidden message, and there's more. "Choi Hannah, working in the research facility on Kelter Prime, has been solving engineering problems that have stumped Valian scientists for years. She looks at their blueprints and immediately sees solutions they never considered." "How is that possible?" Minho asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "She says the designs remind her of something. Patterns that feel familiar. Even though she's never seen alien technology before, when she suggests modifications, the equipment doesn't just work better, It works in ways the Valians never imagined possible. Minnow spread out his symbol charts, his excitement growing. Look at this, he said, pointing to a series of glyphs. These eternal voice symbols, they're not just words. They're activation codes. Instructions for awakening genetic memories that were planted in human DNA thousands of years ago. Gina stared at the papers in amazement. Voices were human? I'm saying they were our ancestors. An advanced human civilization that achieved something incredible before they disappeared. And they left part of themselves in us. He pointed to another set of symbols. Every human carries their knowledge, their capabilities, locked away in our genetic code. But being around alien technology, being exposed to the same energies they once used, it's starting to wake up those dormant abilities. More messages had arrived through the network. Humans across the Empire were reporting similar experiences, sudden understanding of complex systems, intuitive knowledge of alien languages, even the ability to interface directly with certain types of technology, just by touching them. The Valians still saw them as primitive servants. Something ancient and powerful was stirring in humanity's collective consciousness. The children of the eternal voices were beginning to remember who they really were.